right, everyone, we're going to create our first graphical user interface program in Java. Just on the screen, you see an example of what we're going to make today. It's very simple. We've got two JLabels, both that say the exact same thing. The intent is to be able to add two integers together. So when you add them, looks like my window didn't resize well. The sum is 9, okay? And if I click minus, the difference is 3. So I've got a label down here. I've got two JButtons and two JTextFields. All right, notice that right now the layout here is not ideal, and it just kind of reacts to whatever size we drag it with. And that's because I'm using a flow layout. And so the more we learn, we'll be able to control the flexibility or non-flexibility of the layout, but a flow layout is really nice to just get started. So I'm going to close out and we'll start developing this in Eclipse. I'm all set up and ready to go. I created a class called TwoButtons. As I mentioned in the lesson, we're going to extend the JFrame class, and we're going to implement an interface called Action Listener. And an action listener listens for button clicks. Now this is waiting for listener. This is waiting for me to import some other classes that we need in order to get this to work. Okay, and now an action listener is an interface, so it's requiring that we have an action performed method, and so it's going to add that for us right down here at the bottom. We'll get there eventually. Okay, so in this class, we're going to set up some private variables, and we're going to have some JButtons, and we're going to call it, how about btn add and btn subtract. Goodness. And then we'll have a JTextField, and we'll call it txt number 1 and txt number 2. All right, and it's probably wanting me to add JTextField here. Cancel. Let's not create it. Let's import this. What else do we have as an option? There we go. Okay, and just so that we're not importing all of these, I'm just going to grab the whole library there. And that should take care of some things for us. All right, so we're going to also have a JLabel. And we'll have a few of them, LBL first, a LBL second for the first number and the second number, and then one for the answer. LBL answer. Okay, and then finally, my method of creating graphical user interfaces is to organize things in panels, and then I can add the panel to the frame. Okay, so now I've got declarations, but I need some instantiation of these components. So we need to have a constructor for this class. And so this is called TwoButtons. And it is a constructor. So what do we need to do in this constructor? Well, we are extending the JFrame class. So we need to set up the JFrame. So we're going to set the title of this component to say add and subtract. And we're going to set the size of the JFrame to be, how about just 400 by 150. And we're going to set the default close operation to be exit, this is all caps, exit underscore on, there it comes, exit on close. And then we're going to call a method that we write in just a moment to set up the GUI. Now this is not a JFrame component. I like to do this to keep my constructor simple. So I'll just say, go ahead and create a method for me to do that. Finally, after we create the GUI, so we'll set up and instantiate all of our buttons, our labels, our panel. We'll do all of that and create GUI. We'll add the panel to the window, and we'll set the window or the JFrame to be visible. All right, so that's your basic setup. We've got a frame, we set its title, its size, its default close operation. This can be kind of a template for you. I always call a method called create GUI. We add any panels. You could have multiple panels here. You add them all to the frame. Then you set your window or your frame to be visible, and then you're ready to interact with the components on your screen. But right now we haven't instantiated any components, so let's get started doing that. So we'll have a panel, and we've already declared it, but we have to instantiate it. It's a new JPanel, and that's all there is to that. All right, and let's set the layout of this panel. So we'll say panel dot set layout, and we'll say a new flow layout. And there's something called a border layout. They're all different types of layout. There's a grid layout. I'll explain those in a future video. So we've got our panel all set up. And a panel is just an empty container. Looks like I'm going to have to import this. There we go. And I like to skip a space between each component. So now I'm going to set up my first label. And it is a new label. Excuse me, it is a new JLabel. And what do we want the label to say? Well, we can populate it by saying enter an integer. All right, so the next step would be to add that label to the panel. So we'll say panel.add, and we'll say LBL first. So it turns out we are going to have two labels, so we'll cut ourselves some time with the Control-Alt-Up arrow. That'll duplicate it for us. I'm going to skip some space here because our other label will be near the end. And we'll call this LBL second. And we'll say LBL second. Great. Perfect. So next, so we have a label to tell us to enter our two integers. Now we have need a way to input the data. So that would be, if we look up here, we called them txt number 1 and txt number 2. So I'll start with the first one. Txt number 1 is a new JTextField. All right. And you can give it a size for, I'm just going to give it a size of 3 right now. And then I need to again add it. Panel.add txt number 1. All right. And I'll get a semicolon on here. And I'm going to duplicate that. Control Alt up arrow. We'll switch that for number 2, and we'll add number 2. Okay. In the middle of all of this, we're going to add some buttons. So I'll skip some space here, reduce the space here, and then we'll go ahead and we'll add our button. So we have 2 buttons. Let's see what we called them. btn add and btn subtract. So we'll do btn add is equal to a new JButton, and we're just going to put a plus sign on there. Okay, so we have the button. We have to panel.add, the name of the button, btn add. Okay, but with a button we want interactivity, so we have to set up a listener. So we say btn add, we say add an action listener to this. What is this? Well, it's the frame. We're saying, hey frame, listen for a button click. Okay. All right, and we're having 2 buttons, so we'll again duplicate this. Oops. Duplicate that real quick. And we'll change this to a minus and subtract. Subtract. All right. And then we should be good. So I'm just going to check my GUI here. All right, and so let's run this and see if there are any errors. And there are no errors, but if we look at the main method, we didn't have it do anything. So we just need to construct our main method. And to do that, we just need to instantiate our class. So we'll say TwoButtonsDemo is equal to a new TwoButtons. There we go. And I'll try running that again. Hopefully we get something here, and there's our interface. So what are we missing? Well, we can go ahead and we can type in here 3 and 4, 3 and 5. I can click plus. They're both listening for events, but you'll notice we didn't write any code for an action performed here. So we're going to need to do that. And the other thing is we don't have a place to put the answer. So we need to create one more label for the answer. So let's go ahead and do that. All right. So I'll just select the label that I have here, duplicate that, make some space. We'll call this LBL answer. I think we declared that above, and if we didn't, we did LBL answer. And this will just be kind of hidden here. It'll be set up with nothing in it. And we better add it to the panel. Okay, that won't change the layout at all because it's invisible right now. And so now we're ready to do our action performed method. I usually like to put my action performed method above my main method if I keep those in the same class. So I'm just going to follow that format here. Okay, so in this particular program, we have an action performed method. It's taking an action event, okay, with E as the action event variable. So what we need to do is we've got 2 buttons and we don't know which one was clicked. So we can grab the source of that button. So what you can do is you can say object source is equal to e.getSource. So that will get the source of the button. And then you can say, later you can say if the button source is the add button or if it's the subtract button, we can act accordingly. We're also going to need to extract the two numbers from the text boxes, add them together, store it in the answer, and display all of that on the screen. Okay, so we'll declare two integers called num1, and we'll set the first one equal to, so the text boxes, as you can imagine, store text. So we're going to need to parse those into integers. So I'll say integer dot parse integer. And what are we parsing? We're getting the number out of the text box, so txt number1, and we're going to use its getText property or method to grab that text. I will duplicate that, and then I'll do number2, and we'll declare num2 to do that. Now we're ready to see which button was actually clicked. So we'll say, hey, if the source of our button happens to be equal to btn add, if it's the add button, well, we can then perform our operation. So we can, if we're adding, we'll say that int answer is equal to num1 plus num2. All right, and then we can actually set the text of the answer on to the JPanel. Ooh, let's snooze that. Oh goodness, bad timing there. All right, LBL answer, we're going to set the text, come back to me, set text to, how about the sum is, colon, and then we'll say ANS. Okay, and otherwise, we'll just do the subtraction. So we'll do this, we'll say else, and I'll just copy, and we'll paste, and we'll subtract, say difference. And that should do it. It's time to test it. Save this, run it, and here we go. So I'll do 4 and 7 and click plus, sum is 11, -3. Okay, I haven't handled any errors, so if I type in an A here, and I click plus, you see how the GUI continues to run, but the errors pop up down here in the error stack trace. So, but the GUI still is robust enough to continue to run. So we should probably handle those errors. So it's throwing a number format exception. And you know how to handle that with the try catch, or you can throw the exception. But this is our first GUI application, and you should stay tuned for our next video where we will be developing something far more complex.